Hello everybody, welcome to Sensible Fitness, and in this video we're going to learn how to measure calories. In the previous video we saw what a calorie is and we saw what a calorie deficit slash surplus is. Today I'm going to teach you how to measure your calories and teach you how you can see if you are in a caloric deficit or in a caloric surplus. Now, when it comes to calories, as we already previously discussed, they are just a name for a unit of energy. Our body obviously uses energy that is called calories. Measuring calories actually comes in two different areas. You have to measure your calories in and your calories out, or the calories that you consume versus the calories that you burn. And I'll teach you how to measure both sides here. So for your calories in, as we discussed in the previous video, you get your energy from your food. You get your energy from what you eat. And when it comes to eating, everything counts. And it doesn't matter if you've just had a little snack, someone offered you and you just took a little bite, if you had a whole plate, if you had 10 plates of that, it doesn't matter. Every single thing that you consume counts towards your calories. So everything that you eat, whether it was a little, whether it was a lot, whether it was your cheat day, whether it was none of that matters. If you ate it, you will be getting the caloric value that that particular dish or food item gives you. So how do we measure that? Well, that's actually pretty simple here. Now, as we already discussed in the previous one, every gram of carbs is about 4 calories, every gram of protein is about 4 calories, and every gram of fat is about 9 calories. However, when it comes to foods, they're often a mixture of carbs, proteins, and fats, right? And you can't actually measure it individually. So, how do you find the nutrient value for your foods? Simple. You Google it. If you don't believe me, you can actually Google it. Let's take, for example, a mango. And you can just type mango nutritional information. And Google will basically tell you this is how many calories you get per 100 grams of food. So, when it comes to your individual ingredients or your individual fruits and your individual foodstuffs, you can just go to Google and you can just find the nutritional info per 100 grams, per 200 grams, etc. Now, this is where your activity will have to come in because you will now have to measure your food. Now, for example, when it comes to mangoes, you can again go to Google and Google will tell you, every 100 gram of mangoes is about 60 calories ish, and it'll give you a good breakdown of how many carbs are in there, how much of it is fat, how much of it is protein, stuff like that. Now you'll have to do the work, and you'll have to measure how much mango you're eating. So let's say if you're eating 300 grams of mangoes, you obviously have to triple all the values that are shown on Google. And basically doing this for all your individual ingredients, and this could be anything else. It could be for apple, it could be for chicken, it could be for cucumbers, it can be for any food, any fruit, any vegetable, or any single ingredient that you use or that you plan on eating. You can find the nutritional info on Google, and once you find the number of calories per 100 grams, you can then weigh your food. Now, that is for individual ingredients, but how do you count the calories for meals or for dishes? Well, that a couple of ways. One, you can either search for recipes that already give you your caloric information. So you can go online, you can just type in healthy dishes with nutritional info, and you will get full recipes with the nutritional info with a complete breakdown of how many macronutrients and how many micronutrients you are getting. So you will get a full breakdown of that. But what about meals that you already make? What about homemade meals, right? So there are these things called online calorie calculators. Now these are for dishes, and you basically go in there and you put in all the ingredients, you put in the methods that you use to cook, and these online calorie calculators will basically calculate the amount of calories that a particular dish is worth. So if you're making a particular dish, you can basically put in the details on these calorie calculators, and they will tell you the approximate caloric value of a particular dish. So that is how you count the amount of calories you're consuming. If it's individual ingredients, you just have to weigh them, and you can find the approximate caloric information online, and you can just write it down and you can just figure out how many calories you're eating. When it comes to dishes, again, you can go to your online caloric calculators. You can find recipes with the nutrition information, and depending on how much of the food you eat, you can again count the amount of calories that you have consumed. Then of course comes the third thing, packaged food. How do you find the information for packaged food? You don't cook it, you don't know how it was made. Simple. Please just buy foods where you have the nutritional information on the packet itself. So again, if you buy Lays, if you just turn it over, you will get the approximate value there, right? And they obviously will give it per 100 grams. You can just go to the bottom and figure out how heavy the packet that you currently have is, and just find the approximate caloric information that way. Now, just a word of caution here. The caloric value that you find on Google or on any of these sites may not always be 100% accurate. Now, this could either be just the inaccuracy of the nutritional information given as well. So, for example, if you were to go online and you were to look up a recipe, they might say a particular thing is worth 300 calories, but they might actually be wrong and it might be worth 350 calories, and obviously mistakes can happen. But even if they don't do a mistake, so let's, for example, take Google, right? It's a billion-dollar company. They're not really expected to make many mistakes. And let's say that they don't. How a particular individual item is grown. For example, let's again go back to example of mangoes. How it's grown, the kind of fertilizers that are used, stuff like that can also change the caloric and the nutritional value of that ingredient. Furthermore, other factors like heat and light can also change the nutritional value of a particular ingredient, and how you cook it can also change the caloric value. So, when you do calculate your calories, take it up as an approximate. So, don't just go, okay, this is exactly how many calories I've had. Take it as an approximate of like, I approximately had so many calories. Now, for each day, you just add up the individual caloric values of all the food items or dishes that you have eaten, and you basically have the amount of calories you've consumed per day. So, again, for example, let's say I have three big meals, and let's say I have two small meals there. I find the caloric value of each of the three big meals and the caloric value of the two smaller meals and just add it all up, and I have my net caloric intake for the day. Now we actually get to the interesting part, calculating your calories that you burn, right? How do you calculate the amount of calories that you burn? Now, there are several ways you can actually calculate it. The first thing that we have to learn here is your basal metabolic rate. Now, your basal metabolic rate is literally the amount of energy you consume just staying alive to keep your body at 37 degrees Celsius and to make sure that all of your organs are working properly. That is your basal metabolic rate. Now, as to how you can find out your basal metabolic rate, once again, you can go online and you can just put in a BMR calculator, and you will get a rough idea of what your basal metabolic rate is. Or a more accurate way of doing this is to go to a doctor, have them test out your BMR, and give you a more accurate caloric value in terms of how many calories you burn each day just by staying alive. Then, of course, comes your TDEE, or your total daily energy expenditure. Now, this is the approximate amount of energy you burn per day. Now, this includes your BMR as well as your daily activities such as your job, your school, stuff like that. Now, this as well takes into consideration your height, your weight, the amount of lean muscle mass you have, your fat percentage. But this goes one step further and takes into consideration your daily activities. So, for example, if you're someone who's very active, right? Let's say you're an athlete and you're basically running throughout the day. In this case, the amount of calories you burn per day will obviously be higher than someone who just sits in the office and doesn't really move a lot per day. So the TDEE is basically a more robust version of the BMR because it also takes into account your daily activities and also your job, stuff like that. Now, just a note on your TDEE is that your TDEE, or your total daily energy expenditure, also includes a thing called NEAT, NEAT. Now, NEAT is basically the acronym for non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is a fancy way of saying the amount of calories you burn by doing activities that are not considered exercise. So, for example, taking the stairs instead of taking the lift, or walking to your place of work instead of taking a car. Now, this in and of itself, per day, the amount of calories you burn is not really a lot, but over a long time, your NEAT, the amount of calories that you burn through NEAT, is actually very, very significant to your fat loss. In the beginning, I mentioned that this was the more interesting part because when it comes to BMR and when it comes to TDEE, it's actually not just something that is fixed. Right? For example, when it comes to food, every gram of carbohydrates is about 4 grams of calories. Every gram of protein is about 4 grams of calories, and that is almost set in stone. However, when it comes to the amount of calories you burn, it can actually be affected by a lot of things. For example, your stress level. Now, if your stress level is high, if you're producing more stress hormones, the amount of calories that you burn per day is actually less. There's one more phenomenon called starvation mode. Now, this is a word that has been widely spread around the industry, and there's a lot of myth around it, and I probably will do a video on this sometime later. But essentially, it means that if you're in a very drastic caloric deficit for a long period of time, let's say 2-3 months, and you're in a huge caloric deficit, what happens is your basal metabolic rate basically shrinks, because your body kind of reacts to you not giving it enough food, not giving it enough fuel. It basically shuts down most of its activities. And there are also many medical conditions that can, of course, reduce a person's BMR. Now, again, a word of caution: please go to a doctor or a medical professional and get a proper diagnosis, and don't self diagnose yourself with some sort of disorder that reduces the amount of calories that you burn. Just go to a doctor and get a proper diagnosis before this. It's essentially these kind of variables that makes the calorie burning side of it so interesting, because it can actually change person to person, and even in one person, depending on how they're eating, depending on their stress levels, their jobs, etc., it can actually change. But moving on, it's not just your BMR and your TDEE. We should also take into account the exercise activities, right? So let's say you're cycling or dancing or gymming, stuff like that. So how do you measure that? Again, you can take your phone, right? You have many free apps, right? You have Google Fit, JFit, literally millions of apps that will measure the amount of exercises you do, that will tell you the approximate caloric value or the approximate caloric burn per exercise, depending on how much you do it. You also get stuff like your Fitbits, your Fit watches, which you can wear, and they'll give you the amount of calories you burned over the last hour, stuff like that. So you can measure the amount of calories you burn during exercise using those kind of instruments. Now, again, as with the caloric intake side of it, all the values that you see, even if it's taken by a doctor, are approximates. So it's not set in stone. Like if your Fitbit says you burned 100 calories, it's approximately 100 calories. It's not 100 calories exactly. Right? Because even your Fitbit, no matter how expensive it is, can't really measure everything accurately. Same with your TDE or your BMR, no matter what doctor you go to, it is a more accurate approximation than, say, if you were to go on the internet and try and find out. But it is an approximation at best, and you can have slight fluctuations in the amount of calories that you burn, be it in the BMR, the TDEE, or in your exercise related activities. So, if you're looking for a caloric deficit, you can measure the amount of calories you consume. You can measure the amount of calories you burn. The approximate calories that you consume is lesser than the approximate calories that you burn, and you will be in a caloric deficit. And the exact opposite to be in a caloric surplus, right? You measure the amount of calories that you're eating, and you measure the approximate calories that you're burning, and you make sure that the approximate calories that you're consuming is higher than the approximate calories you're burning. Now, do you need to measure everything to actually be in a caloric deficit or a caloric surplus? No, because if I eat a certain food, I am still getting the caloric value whether I measure it or not. But what measuring calories actually does is sort of help you keep a check on the amount of calories you're either eating or burning. Now, because a lot of people think they're in a caloric deficit, but they're actually in a caloric surplus because they don't actually know how to measure the food, and they often think that they're eating a lot less than they're actually eating. Measuring what you eat will actually help you figure out the actual gap in the amount of calories you think you're eating versus the actual amount of calories you are eating. And once you figure out the gap, you can then, of course, take steps to address that. But coming back to the main point, you don't actually have to be measuring everything you eat. You don't have to write down the total amount of calories you consume, total amount of calories you burn. You don't have to do that. As long as you're eating whole foods, as long as you're eating less, in terms of caloric value, terms, as long as you're eating less calories, as long as you're burning more calories, as long as you're generally staying fit, you will be in a caloric deficit. Will it be a very big caloric deficit? Again, depends on what you eat, how much activities you do, stuff like that. So you do not need to measure your calories, but if you believe that you have been in a caloric deficit and you're not losing fat, or if you believe you have been in a caloric surplus and you're not gaining weight, then actually counting your calories would give you a fresh perspective and maybe a sort of reality check on how many calories you're actually consuming, how many calories you're actually burning, and will help you actually realize what your actual caloric surplus or deficit is. That was the video on how to measure your calories. I hope this was informative. I hope you liked the video. Please do like, share, and subscribe. Please do click the bell icon so you never miss a video. If you're interested in conversations about school days or music, please do check out the Basic Travel podcast. If you're interested in gaming, please do check out That Indian Gamer. If you have any comments, doubts about this video, if you have any topic ideas that I can make into a full-fledged video, you can leave that in the comments down below, or you can email me or DM me on Instagram. All the links, as usual, will be down in the description below. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.